I didn't think I'd be a nonprofit influencer. Thank you so much for joining us yet again. Our guest today is Blondell Pinnock, CEO of Bedford Stuyvesant Restoration Development Corporation. Just a couple words all thrown together. But Blondell is one of my favorites. I love talking to her. When she first took over the helm of CEO out there, it was such a joy and a pleasure. And I've really watched her take on some of the larger problems that I have seen in the nonprofit sector. So Blondell, why don't you say hello?
Hello.
Hi, good morning, Christy, and thank you for having me here. I'm just so grateful to be able to sit down with you and have this discussion.
Yeah, me too. I think it's good because Blondell, sometimes we text and we talk on the phone, and I saved her number so early on in meeting her. And I don't do that with everybody. Don't judge me for it. But I was like, I feel like I'm really going to like this woman. So anyway, very excited. So you're joining us here for our leadership transition, 60 days to stability. If you are either a new leader or a leaving leader, what are some of the things that you need to have inside the organization or prepare for? And when I met Blondell, she was coming in, she had a CFO or she had legacy staff, and she really had to figure out what it was that she needed as the new CEO and what she didn't. And so I guess the first question to you is, when you started, what was your moment of reckoning? What was it like? Ugh, it would be worse to continue doing this than it would be to change.
Yeah. So my moment of reckoning. So my background is I started my career as an attorney and then I went into banking. So I did real estate lending, construction lending, focused on affordable housing. So I became a banker at heart. Didn't start out that way, but that became my passion, and that was the work I was doing. So it was very important for me to understand the financial fundamentals of the institution that I was asked to lead. And as time progressed, I realized that I was not getting that information that I needed in order to be knowledgeable, to understand, to be able to speak to my board in some, sense of fluency about what was happening within the organization. Um, it became more contentious.
Mm-hmm.
I was just running this organization blind for at least a year and a half. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
getting any information that I needed. And that was the reckoning for me because like you said, I knew that I could not continue operating this organization in blindness. It would not work well for me, it wasn't working well for the organization. And so that was my moment of reckoning, and I had to figure something out. Besides dealing with a legacy staff, and dealing with an organization that was, potentially facing financial crisis, I had to figure out, sequencing, what to do first, because
Yeah.
everything's coming at you at the same time. And I
Yeah.
think for me, um, having a financial understanding, knowledge, and creating an organization that would be stable was the most important thing for me to focus on.
And
Um,
I think so many new leaders, some people are really scared of finance. Some people are really afraid of I don't know if I want to look, I don't want to
mhm,
know. And we have a lot of those, right?
mhm.
And I think when you are more comfortable in finance, you also understand what you should be having and when you don't have it, that it's more of a red flag than if you were too scared to look under the hood in general.
I mean, I was asking for, and the things I was asking for was pretty basic. I
Yeah.
was asking for the financials, of the organization, statement of cash and balances, charter accounts, and I was basically being told no. I was like,
Right.
I'm not gonna, I
I
was
do
like, I'm
remember
not
you
getting this.
saying that.
And here's what happened. I mean, what was happening was that the organization was so focused on audits, because the organization had been behind in audit. So audits took up the bulk of the air and the space and the oxygen that existed in the organization. What that
That's
meant
the
is
point.
that everything else played a secondary role, right? Because you had this one person at the top of the food chain with respect to that was their focus, and
Hmm.
only that person had that information. Only that person did that, which also meant that that person was not doing other things within regards to the financial well-being of the organization. And then so that became abundantly clear. And I had to really kind of pull that Band-Aid
Uh-huh.
and like rip it off.
Right.
And it was good in many respects. I mean, it definitely caused some impact
Of
because
course.
when you take that titular person off or out of the organization, who's responsible for all these things, it
Hmm.
definitely has a ripple effect on the functioning of the organization. But I think ultimately to try and build the organization back better, that's what needed to happen.
And I think we call that a lot, when the institutional person they have all the institutional knowledge, but we also call it like a father may I or a mother may I situation because you have to go to that person and they understand that. And there's a lot of reasons why that develop in an organization. It's not all like malice, right? But
Yeah.
I think that's the hard part about then unwinding it. And so, how did you discover the full extent of what was locked inside that role? And then I would say, what did it cost you in real terms? But we just talked about that. But when you're looking at the rest of your staff, like how did you also manage that kind of like departure so that way you weren't going to set it up to repeat itself or to happen down the road?
Yeah. So that's a good question. So from a departure, I mean, so during the time that I was there, I started looking at the different roles that were necessary that I needed to support myself as a new leader, besides looking at the roles in the organization as a whole, and started to make changes within the leadership space. Well, I know I needed a number. I needed a number two. I needed a chief of
Yeah.
staff. I needed someone to help me because there was too many things that I was tackling at the same
Hmm.
time. So that was, one of the first hires that I made, and I was fortunate to find someone in the organization that was familiar, and she has been like a rock star and
Rachel's
stellar for
great.
me, which has been great with Rachel Joseph. So I've been happy with that, and then made other changes within the executive role or bands within the organization. When it came to the CFO, that was the hardest one. All right.
Yeah.
And I was told it was going to be hard. I was told by
That's
a board
true.
member, like that's
That's
that
true.
one, that one
Yeah,
you're
that's
gonna have
gonna be hard.
problems with.
Yeah.
That's gonna be hard. And so, and it was. But what I realized is that in taking that role out and bringing someone inside, particularly bringing someone in, particularly someone who's outside of the organization, and that was my first interaction with you, and getting
Hmm.
a fractional CFO in, understanding how the CFO role should be and the level
Yeah.
of partnership that's supposed to exist between that chief executive
Mhm.
and the CEO was like daylight, because I didn't have that, right?
Right.
And being able to just have someone who I could speak with and who could help from a thought leadership standpoint and could present to my board in a very simple, laid out manner was revolutionary.
Right.
And interesting. I remember that first meeting when Tom came on, who's our fractional CFO through Carey. It was hard for the board to hear some of the things that he had to say.
Oh, I'm sure.
It was
I don't
hard.
envy his position there.
And he delivers it in a very very
Uh-huh, that's true.
straightforward manner. But the board had not heard it in that way before, and they needed to.
Uh-huh.
And they needed to. And it was a conversation, that was a moment of reckoning I had to have with my board chair to say, look, I understand what you are used to hearing, and maybe what you need to hear, but this is the type of information and this is the type of person that I need to have to support me. I need to have someone who's looking out and saying, here are all the pitfalls, here are all the landmines, here are
Mm,
all the things that can happen. And that's what I need, because then it allows me as a CEO to navigate and pivot and think about the directions that I need to take. But if I
right.
don't have anybody telling me this,
How do you lead an organization?
yeah, I'm rudderless,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So that was really good. And I mean, I think the most dynamic step that I made with respect to that is I've reached out to, my network and resources. And I said, look, I need to bring someone in this organization who can help
Right.
me understand the financial well-being. And I reached out to a major funder,
Uh-huh.
we all know. And this person, without a blink of an eye, sent me money so that I could allocate that to have this person. And it was, a game changer for me. I think it
For
was a
sure.
game changer for the organization. It allowed us to see where we were. It allowed us to make some shifts and changes in the organization. It allowed us to go out and seek additional funding.
Hmm.
So it opened up so many avenues and doors by making that one decision as a chief executive. Like there's certain decisions I've made
Right.
that I can count on my board now, and
Uh-huh.
that was again a very critical decision for me to make, and one of the most important decisions that I made.
Well, and I think that you have chosen transparency in this situation instead of trying to hide it. And I think most of the time people don't what they're either worried or embarrassed or they're anxious that like, oh God, the skeleton's in the closet if anybody knew. But I think you've taken a very bold position and said, no, you need to know. You need to see what this is. And I want to be able to talk openly about where the organization is, who I have here, what I need. And I feel like that part in and of itself is the heroic, right? To be able to say like, no, we need to be able to talk about this freely. And if there was advice that you could give to another executive director or CEO that is also going through this, marrying those two thoughts, like what would be your advice? What would be the thing that this is keeping you up at night? How do you handle it?
So my mantra always is lead with transparency, right? And yes, open the closet, take out the skeletons, get a broom.
Tear down the
Get the
house.
right, right, right. Get all the cobwebs out, all of the
Exactly.
crumbs. That is to me the best way to do it, because you never want to be in a situation as a leader where people can't trust what you're saying, or
Right,
where they think that something else is going to come out that I didn't know. And I because I do think that transparency ultimately leads to trust. And I think putting everything out on the table, the good and the bad, I think it shows that, okay, I understand everything that this organization is dealing with. And I know that 2 months later, you're not going to come to me and say, oh, but by the way, there's this thing. I'm like, nope. Here it all is. And I've
right,
had conversations with my staff. I've had, and like, well, should we say? I'm like, tell everything. Tell
right,
everything, because I don't want to have to come back and have another conversation.
right,
Tell everything.
right,
We have nothing to hide. Because then eventually you're going to wind up knowing it anyway. So
right.
the best thing is
Exactly.
to
Exactly.
upfront, here's what and I always like to give me the bad news first, and then I give you the good news.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
I just think it's just so important, because it really engenders trust. And you need your board to trust you. You need your
Hmm.
staff to trust you. You need your constituents who you're helping to trust you. The agencies that you're working with, that you have contracts with, and the
Uh-huh.
funders. So you have to really generate trust. And I think you can only do that through truth and transparency.
And I think it's such a good point, right? And I think it takes more energy to remember pieces of the truth than it does just to like tell
Yeah.
the truth. And I think that's the part where if you were sitting there talking to somebody, you're like, God, that's just so, like it's just so much out of your like personal day to be like, well, I said this to one person and I can't say it over here. And
Yeah.
so often like that just creates more hoopla than it does actually help. And to your point, right, to a major funder who talks so like warmly and proudly of you about how you're leading this organization and how you're standing in like just an overwhelming sense of adversity. I think it resonates, right? It continues to go out. So don't be afraid of it. Step into it.
I mean, and I will say this, I think for me, understanding that, I didn't create the situation,
Yeah, that's
I think I think makes a big difference, right? I'm like, okay,
yep,
this is what I'm here, and I'm understanding all the pieces and all the things, and let's see if I can try to fix it.
right.
So I do come at it at a very different, I'm not carrying or harboring any guilt or any
That helps.
insecurity or anything. So I think
Yeah.
that also helps. That helps me with my story and my narrative.
Yeah. Fair point. Blondell, thank you so much. This is so much fun. So take a look for our white paper that is being released too, 60 Days to Stability, when you only have a little time left. Check that out and we'll all be in touch. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Christy, once again, and Carey and Co. You've been such a, definitely such a blessing for at least for me personally, and for the organization. So thank you for everything.
Of course.
Okay.
So nice.
Bye.